是召唤，也是使命。马术运动遇见了这位天选之子，而他也毅然选择马背上的人生。
Very special sport to be a part of, and it's an amazing way to lead a life.
身披红旗，为国出征，马术早已成为他生命中的一部分。
Sports was in my blood, it was in my background, it was what I love to do.
可凡倾听，本期走进中国马术奥运第一人华天。华天，一个中国马术圈中响当当的名字。这位中英混血儿是马术领域内公认的天才，同时，华天也是奥运会历史上第一位正式亮相的中国骑士。他以坚持向前的每一步，见证并推动着中国马术运动的发展。
你好，华天。
你好。
欢迎来我们的这个节目啊。我知道你很小就去了香港，然后去英国，在那儿长大。能不能用中文给大家做一个简单的自我介绍？
我是中国奥运马术三项赛骑士 Alex 华天。我在中国长大，然后11岁去英国读书，然后我的马训练比赛现在都是在英国、欧洲。
As a Chinese equestrian stars, you brought this kind of sports to the public attention. So, for audience who may still be unfamiliar with this kind of sports, so could you please tell us what kind of the sport is and what is so charming about it?
So, equestrian sports 马术 is a sport that is a team sport between a rider and a horse. But of particular importance is the partnership between horse and rider, because there are other sports that have horses, for example, racing, 赛马. But this is not technically classed as equestrian because the partnership in that sport is not such a priority. Whereas in equestrian sports, we have the 3 Olympic equestrian sports: pure show jumping, pure dressage, and then my sports, equestrian eventing, which is like a triathlon of equestrian sports. 1 day dressage, 1 day cross country, 越野赛, 1 day show jumping, 场地障碍. And the partnership between horse and rider is a very special, very magical thing. We have to remember that these horses are big, emotional animals. They are animals that are very easily frightened. They're very easily startled. They've been bred, evolved over many millions of years to run away from us. And so for the horses to be generous enough to give us their trust, to allow us as riders, as their carers, to do the things that we do together, jump over big fences into water, jump big show jumping fences in front of thousands of people watching. It's a very special thing, and it's a very, very special sport to be a part of, and it's an amazing way to lead a life.
在2023年举行的杭州亚运会上，由华天、包英凤、孙华东、梁瑞基组成的中国队，在全场欢呼声中斩获马术3项赛团体金牌，华天更夺得马术3项赛个人赛金牌。骑乘万里，行则必至。这是自1982年新德里亚运会正式设置马术项目以来，中国队首次获得亚运马术项目金牌。
2023 season that has just ended, you have China to our first ever Asian Games equestrian gold. How did you feel when you took home the gold for our country?
It was, I have to say, it was a very special moment. It was, the amazing thing was it was individual gold, but it was also team gold, which I think for the sport in China is a true milestone. I was hugely relieved. This is only the second time that I've competed in mainland China. The first time, of course, was the Beijing 2008 Olympic Games, where the equestrian was held in Hong Kong, China. So Hangzhou this year was, or last year was only my second ever time. and to be able to deliver that kind of result in front of a home crowd in such a beautiful facility in Tonglu, with such an amazing organization, it was really genuinely very special. I was very, very pleased and proud to share that moment with my teammates, with my supporters, with my horse owners, my Maju, and my very, very special horse, Hai Wang. So very, very happy.
In 1995, at the age of 6, you moved to Hong Kong with your parents for systematic equestrian training. So why did your parents decide to ask you to focus on this area?
So actually, I started to learn to ride when I was 4 in Beijing. And I don't know whether I went to Hong Kong to actually learn to ride. I think I went to Hong Kong because I think that was convenient for what was convenient for my parents at the time. My mum and my mother's family have always been tremendously horsey themselves. My mother learned to ride when she was younger. Horses have always been a huge influence on her. And I think wherever she's been in the world, wherever she's worked in the world, the first thing she's done when she's got off the plane is go to find a good stables to be able to go and have a horse and be able to ride herself. And so even as a baby, as a young child, I always spent time around the stables. I was like my mother's xiao ma gong. And so even when I was too young to ride, I was around the stables, taking in the smells, the sights, being comfortable around the horses. So when we moved to Hong Kong, there was again an opportunity to ride there, and I was part of the pony club there, and it was a really formative part of my riding. But I would say it was more of a natural progression rather than a strategic choice.
When did you truly fall in love with the sports?
I think as a child, I think horses are an incredibly magical animal for children. I think, looking back on it now, horses are big emotional animals. I think children are able to connect with that emotion and are hugely empathetic to animals, naturally. More so, I think, than adults are when you first meet a horse. And horses they have such open eyes. You can really look into a horse's soul through the eyes. And they are incredibly gentle and generous. They can be also very powerful and a little bit frightening if they get scared of you. But to children who are not threatening, horses are incredible with them. And I think for children, spending time around horses, you learn a huge amount of natural confidence, patience, dedication. You learn how to use your body language and your own emotions to develop that bond of trust and partnership with a horse, even if it's just on the floor. It's not even necessarily riding. Being able to handle the horse on the floor is also a huge part of being a horseman. And I think as a child, when you have the privilege to grow up around horses like that, you can't help but fall in love with them. And I think I was very lucky to have that opportunity.
What do you think the equestrian sport tested for required in the professional athletes?
I think as a professional rider, you have to have a huge number of attributes. You have to be tremendously patient. You know, building a partnership with a horse takes many years. You have to be tremendously resilient because life with horses is an extreme emotional roller coaster. Horses are not cars. You can't just turn them on and expect it to go. You have to pour your heart out and trust the horse, and you don't always get it back. You know, you don't always get what you put in back. And I think it's that element of horses that is the true reason why the sport is so linked, the higher end of the sport is so linked to wealthy, successful, royalty, people associate it as being quite an elitist sport sometimes, which I don't believe it to be in the whole, on the whole. But I think for a lot of very successful people who are in control of every other aspect of their life, when you are in front of a horse, that horse doesn't know how much money you spent on it. That horse doesn't know a lot of things, and it doesn't care how much control you have over this aspect of your business or that aspect of what you're doing in your life. It only respects the time and the effort that you put into that horse. And even then, you still might not get it back.
Have you ever experienced any challenge or setback during training?
I can tell you I've had far more setbacks than I've had successes. And that is life with horses. Horses keep you tremendously humble. They're big emotional animals. I've fallen off hundreds of times. The moment you feel like you are getting somewhere, that you are successful, that you get that feeling of being a bit on top of the world, you're on the floor the next day, looking up at the sky, going, "Oh, there we go again."
可凡倾听下节预告。
Why did you end up choosing the equestrian sports as your career?
I look back on it now and think how brave I was, but also how lucky to have that kind of opportunity.
How did you feel when you stepped into the Olympic arena as a Chinese representative?
I very much recognize that the Beijing Olympic Games gave me a taste of what I wanted without giving me the whole pie. And that definitely contributed towards the decision of staying riding and feeling like I had more to do, that I had more to prove.
广告很短，马上回来。2000年，华天随父母来到英国，入学伊顿公学。在伊顿公学，他跟随业内闻名遐迩的马术教练训练。在教练的悉心督促下，华天在马术方面进步神速。年仅14岁，他就成为了最年轻的国际1星级骑手。16岁时，更跃升为最年轻的2星级骑手。
You became a registered professional rider with FEL with the age of 14, breaking the conventional age limit of 6-year-old and above. So, how did you feel back then?
I'm
You
not
should be proud of that.
I was registered with the FEI when I was 14, 15 years old. I did my first FEI event when I was 15 in France at Martin Vast. I remember it very well with Sun Wukong, my first horse, my mum's horse. And but I think actually in Europe there are quite a lot of kids, there are quite a lot of young riders who compete at that level, at that kind of age, 13, 14, 15 years old. So so actually in Europe it's not necessarily that unusual. But growing up around horses in Europe, competing at that level with my friends, was a wonderful time. It's a very welcoming, open sport. But at the same time, riding horses, competing internationally in Europe, especially then, I was the only Chinese face. And it's really nice to see now, however many years later, I don't like to admit, there are, it's still quite rare, but there are more and more young Chinese faces coming out onto the European equestrian scene, and that's a really lovely thing to see. But certainly growing up, I realized that I was a little bit different.
You went to the famous Eton College for High School and studied among many royal family members. Growing up in such an environment, you may have a lot of options in the future. So why did you end up choosing the equestrian sports as your career?
Eton was a very special place, a very special school with huge amount of history. But I think for me, equestrian sports was in my blood. It was in my background. It was what I loved to do. It was I guess what set me apart and what I excelled in. And Eton has a lot of history, and obviously you have a lot of opportunities from a place like that.
Yes.
However, I think the reason why the school's so special is that it genuinely pushes you to pursue what you want to do, pushes you to excel in what you want to do. And I was very lucky to be at a school like that, because I think to pursue...
How many years did you stay there?
5 years in total, but I took a year out between my last 2 years. So I think I would not have been able to go to the Beijing Olympic Games at all if I was at a school that was less supportive. They allowed me to take a year out to train and qualify for the Beijing Olympics, and then come back to finish my A-levels, which, to be really honest, I look back on that now and I think, my God, you know, at an age of sort of 16, 17 years old, to make that kind of decision, you know, I look back on it now and think how brave I was, but you know, also how lucky to have that kind of opportunity.
In 2006, you become the youngest 3-star riders, and during the Royal Windsor, you received a medal from the Queen. How did you feel at that time?
It was somewhat surreal, I think. The Royal Windsor Horse Show is just across the river from Eton, so I can walk to that horse show. And I was riding Sun Wukong, my first horse, my mother's horse, who was a really big character, very good show jumper. And it was a team competition. I was riding for the school, so I was riding for Eton. And we won the Queen's Plate, which was an amazing thing to do. And I jumped off for the team in front of the Queen, which was amazing. And then again, we had a procession, and she presented the awards. And to be honest, I was a little bit petrified, because Sun Wukong, we called him, in the stable name was Monkey, was quite a monkey.
Monkey kick.
Yes. And I just remember he had this terrible habit when he was excited of throwing his head up and down. But luckily the Queen was a tremendous horsewoman herself. She loved horses. Racing was her great passion, and she rode into her 80s. So I think she very much recognised that Sun Wukong was quite a handful. But she still presented me and him with the award, and my teammates. But she kept a little bit of a distance.
这个中国人讲，看到这个骑马的这个绅士啊，中国人会讲叫骑士精神。Do you know what is 骑士精神?
Yes.
Chivalry.
Yes.
So what is your understanding of 骑士精神 chivalry?
So this is a very interesting question, because actually I have a different interpretation of 骑士精神. I call it, I translate that as horsemanship. And in the English language, there is this word called horsemanship, that we actually have a project called 骑士精神, which translates it differently like this as well. And horsemanship, to me, means the values of the partnership between horse and rider: respect, responsibility, and compassion, which in some ways has a link to the concept of chivalry. But I think horsemanship is a much more contemporary and relevant term than chivalry.
As we know, your father is a Chinese and your mother is a British. It is said that your grandfather is among China's first pilots and won the special merit during the Korean War, 抗美援朝. So could you please tell us what kind of the person your grandfather was?
My grandfather, Hua Longyi, was a very, very special man. When I was growing up, he lived in Guangzhou, and so we actually spent a lot of time with him. It was obviously a very short train ride from Hong Kong up to Guangzhou to visit him and my nanai. And they were very special people, and very special to myself and my little brother as well, because not only was my grandfather such a big figure, you know, it's really amazing as a grandchild to see a grandfather so respected by his peers, to be such a big personality, always leading the conversation, but also really an important part of my life as a connection to a really different period of history for China. You know, for myself as a dual heritage young child, a foot in two different cultures, to have that kind of grounding to that era, listening to him telling stories, listening to my grandmother telling stories, listening to my father and his sisters telling stories about them, was very important. I think it still has a huge influence on me now.
Did he tell us some stories during the war?
Yes, he had.
Have you remember?
Yes. I think,
what kind of story? Yeah.
Well, I think the kind of personality that he was very open, very optimistic. He loved to tell his stories, and so he told a lot of stories about the war, about flying his planes in his squadron in North Korea, and you know, I heard a lot about, you know, both the fighting, but also the time he was shot down, when he met my grandmother. So my grandmother was a doctor, an Air Force doctor.
Air Force doctor.
Yeah, so he met her when he was shot down. So really very, very special, very interesting. But actually, funnily enough, and it still connects to me now, I think because I was a child when he was telling me his stories, actually, it was his stories as a child himself in Shanxi, and you know, swimming across the Yellow River to Yan'an. It was that stories of him as a child that really connected to me, and I found most interesting.
What was your grandfather influence on you?
I think it can't be understated how much of an influence he had. He's had a huge influence on the whole family, and that certainly had a huge influence on me indirectly and directly from him himself. I think he was an incredibly proud grandfather and father, you know, to my father and my aunts. He was also tremendously open and welcoming, because obviously, you know, my father married my mother. My mother's English. When my parents got married, they got married in the UK in Cambridge Cathedral, and there were lots of very interesting stories about my grandfather traveling to the UK. I think he went to visit the Imperial War Museum in the UK, and meeting my British grandfather. That kind of openness to the cross-cultural influences, it was very, very important to me, especially somebody who grew up being from dual heritage.
从小耳濡目染家人爱国热情的华天，是参加奥运会次数最多的中国马术选手。这项赛事对于他而言，仿佛是一种记录人生进程的年轮。2008年，18岁的华天首次代表中国出战，成为当时奥运会历史上最年轻的马术3项赛运动员，也是中国首位参加奥运马术3项赛项目的运动员。
During 2008 Beijing Olympic Games, you become the first Chinese riders of only 18 years old, right? So how did you feel when you stepped into the Olympic arena as a Chinese representative?
Obviously, incredibly proud. But I think when you're 18 years old, you don't think you're that young. Looking back at it now, when I'm 34 years old, I realize how young, how inexperienced, how naive I was, and what a tremendous opportunity. Sadly, I fell off at the 8th fence on the cross country. But I do think that set me up for the rest of my life with horses. If I'd finished the Beijing Olympic Games and finished a nice result, maybe I was 30th or something like that, I think I probably would have gone to university, and I would have felt like I've done what I wanted to do. But looking back on it now, I very much recognize that the Beijing Olympic Games gave me a taste of what I wanted without giving me the whole pie. And that definitely contributed towards the decision of staying riding and feeling like I had more to do, that I had more to prove.
You once said that you enjoy the vibe of being a team and having the partners to fight alongside you. You are now finally have a Chinese equestrian team. So how does it feel?
I have wonderful teammates.
Yeah.
There are now 4 of us competing at the highest level in Europe, which for many years was not the case. For many years it was just myself competing in equestrian eventing at Olympic level. So there's myself, Song Huadong, Bao Yingfeng, and my very good friend Liang Ruiji. And yeah, competing as a team is a great feeling. You know,
Do you compete with each other?
Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely. You know, when we're competing in Europe, we're very much competing against each other. But it's, like I say, it's a very friendly, it's a very open sport because of the challenges of the cross-country and the yueyuesai, with the dangers and the risk of that element of our sport. I think that there's a spirit and a camaraderie within eventing that doesn't exist so much in other sports, where it's the riders against the course, not rider against rider. And when I was growing up in Europe competing, I always felt comfortable asking my fellow rider, how did this combination ride? Did you do 3 strides or 4 strides? And quite often, you know, I'd finish the cross country and somebody would ask me, oh, how did that angle ride? Were you good on the left rein or good off the right rein? So I think it's not like some other sports where it's, you know, you're aggressively competitive with one another. There's much more camaraderie.
Speaking of partners, I think what is special for equestrian sports is that you also have animal partners. So how many horse partners do you have since you began your athletic journey?
Gosh, I've had.
Have you remember?
No, I haven't counted. I've had many horses that I've competed with. Some very successfully, some not so successfully. It's the same with everything. It's the same with people. Sometimes you get on like a house on fire with some people, and other people just aren't your cup of tea. And so it's the same with horses. I've had some wonderful horses through my career. Of course, we've talked already about Sun Wukong, who was my first horse. That was my mum's. I had a wonderful horse in the Beijing 2008 Olympic cycle called Hua Mulan, who...
A beautiful name.
Yeah, and she was a beautiful horse as well. You know, she was a muma. She was grey. She was very gentle, but with a huge heart. She gave me my first ever ride around badminton horse trials, which was a very special moment for me. Tang Rene Lu, who was my Olympic partner for the Rio Olympics and the Tokyo Olympics, so quite rare for a horse to do 2 Olympic Games in their career. And obviously he was 8th at the Rio Olympics, which was my best ever results, which was great. And then the horses I have at the moment, my top horses, I have Li, who's probably the most talented horse I've ever ridden. And then we have Hai Wang, of course, who was my gold medal partner at the Hangzhou Asian Games. All individual characters. And that's why, you know, during the Beijing Olympic Games, we, as a family, decided to give each of my horses Chinese names to try and help the public understand that each of these horses have their own very strong personalities.
It's very interesting. Just like human partners need to learn how to work together, so do riders and their horses partners. So is it a challenging process?
It is a lifelong artistry for a rider to learn how to develop relationships with a horse. You look at riders competing at Olympic Games, and we have a long shelf life as athletes. And not only do we have long careers, but the older the rider is, the more experience they have developing different relationships with different types of horses. And it's all of those experiences that come together to make what is a complete rider. You know, every day you're with the horses, you're training at home, you're at competitions, you're learning new things about each horse, about horses in general, and also about yourself. It takes tremendous patience, dedication, resilience, but also you have to have a very open heart and a generosity yourself to trust the horse. And in the end, you have to ask the horse to have an open heart and generosity to trust you. And as big emotional animals with you know a very strong flight instinct, it is a huge thing to ask the horses to do, is to trust you like that.
So it is quite difficult for you to win each other trust and reach the alignment.
Yes, of course, because top horses are sensitive horses. You want a horse that is really wants to do it, is excited about doing it, has the desire, but that means that these top horses are like successful people. You've met many successful people in your career, and I imagine most of them have very strong characters, very strong personalities, and it's just the same with horses. They have very strong personalities, very strong characters, very sensitive. And so the better a horse you have, the better horse you ride, the more sensitivity, the more nuance, the more experience you need as a rider to be able to mold and shape that horse in the direction that you want to go in.
In 2009, you were admitted by an aerospace engineer program in the University of Bristol, but you decided to defer your studies. So will you consider going back maybe one day in the future?
Better not remind my father about that.
Okay.
Yes, I had a very uncomfortable conversation with my parents 2 days before I was supposed to go to university, and I outlined to them that I wished to continue with the horses and try and make a living and a career out of it. I'd obviously already been to the Beijing Olympic Games. I'd been back to school for 1 year to finish my A-levels. And I have to say, at that moment in time, before I made that decision, I wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to ride as a career. I'd been based with my trainers, Clayton, Lucinda Fredericks, an Australian couple in the UK, for many years. And I'd seen how hard a life it was living with horses, trying to make a living out of stables, the emotional roller coaster that is our sport. And I saw how difficult it was emotionally for them. And I had a full respect about how hard that life was. And I wasn't 100% sure that I was ready for that or wanted that. And I think it's only when you're at the cusp of something being taken away from you that you realize how important that thing is to you. And I had a very young person, naive idea that I was going to be able to do a very full-time university degree and compete at the highest level with the horses and have some kind of life and fun with it all. And I realized that wasn't possible. And something had to give.
Yeah.
And so I managed to persuade my parents that if I wasn't able to make it look feasible and realistic, that actually I would go back to university after 3 years. But luckily, so far, things have gone in the right direction. And I never had to make that decision.
可凡倾听下节预告。
As a member of Shanghai equestrian team, so what is your impression of our city?
Shanghai is really starting to feel like home when I come back to China, which again I won't tell my father because he's a real Beijing人.
The equestrian sport is a long term. What age do you plan to keep riding?
As long as I'm fit, fit and healthy and want to do it. But as long as I'm fit and healthy, I'm pretty sure I'm always going to want to do it.
广告很短，马上回来。2021年底，华天与上海马术协会正式签约，成为了上海马术队的一员。这些年来，他将自己的目光聚焦于公益项目，致力于传播马术文化和骑士精神。华天和好友发起了骑士精神行动等公益项目，旨在通过让中国青少年近距离接触和体验马术运动，感受到其核心价值观：同理心、尊重与责任。
As a member of Shanghai equestrian team, so what is your impression of our city?
I love Shanghai. My 二姑 lives in Shanghai.
Yeah, 二姑 so live in Shanghai.
Lives in Shanghai.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've been a part of the Shanghai equestrian team since 2021, and I'm actually very close to the Shanghai equestrian team because the Secretary General and the Chief Coach Lu Wei, Lu Jiaolian, actually is a very good friend of my family's and somebody that I've known since I was 6-7 years old when I was in Hong Kong. She taught me how to swim. She used to be a champion modern pentathlete, and so I feel very close to the city. More and more of my friends and my maju and my supporters are from here in Shanghai, and yeah, Shanghai is really starting to feel like home when I come back to China, which again I won't tell my father because he's a real Beijing人。
不是上海人。These recently you have done a mini for a profit event in Shanghai. So what are you going to do more about that?
So the last few years with the Shanghai 体育局, we've done a very exciting special charity project called 华天人马一心. We've been using that project to introduce young riders here in Shanghai to the importance of stable management, the importance of the care of the horse, importance of many different aspects of the sport that are not necessarily to do with the riding. Because of course, with equestrian sports, we're not just talking about the time we're in the saddle, training and competing. As riders, we have tremendous responsibility for our horses, for our animals, in their care. And a happy, healthy athlete, a happy, healthy horse is a successful horse. And that is one of the key messages that we are trying to spread through our projects and through our programs. We have a really fun social media series called 华天来了, which talks about, the first year talked about different horse care tips. This year, last year we talked, 2023, we talked about basic riding position. And each year we're going to be talking about different things. We do a sports day for young riders every year as well, with lots of different challenges to do with the care of the horse. And it's really good fun. And for me, it's projects like this that I'm really passionate about. Of course, my number one focus is on my sport and on my training and my competition. But I'm hugely passionate about my sport. I'm hugely passionate about my sport here in China. And I have a huge belief, not only in the sport's potential and success here in China, but also the opportunity for the sport and horses to bring something very special to society, especially for children, to teach a huge amount about character education.
As we know, you have done many things to promote equestrian sport in China, especially in Shanghai. So what was the biggest challenge for you?
I think for me, the challenge that I set myself is how do we reconnect society to the horse here in China. Like we were talking earlier in the interview about 骑士精神. What does it mean?
Yeah.
To you, it means chivalry. To me, it means horsemanship. And for me, I think that is my key target, is to try and change the discourse around what do horses mean in society. Now that's a big long-term project, but I think it's really important because, you know, when I was young, I had the privilege of riding and spending time around horses. I know what it's given me, not just in terms of sports and successes and this and that, but in terms of my personality, in terms of character, in terms of being able to deal with life challenges. And I think as China continues to develop, and as Mashu continues to develop in China and become more and more accessible, which it's developing tremendously quickly, I think there are more and more opportunities for young people in China to be involved and to be involved in that magic. It's not about looking beautiful on a horse. It's about that partnership between you and the kid and the pony, or the child and the horse. It's about the lessons learned. It's about falling off and learning to get back on the horse. It's about learning that after the lesson, before you have a drink, before you, you know, have a shower, you have to care for the horse first and make sure the horse is comfortable before the horse goes back to stable. You know, that's how I was taught by my mum when I was with horses, and I think the social responsibility, the confidence, the patience, the values that I learned, I think are very, very important thing for all children to learn.
It is almost 15 years since you returned to China to promote the athlete sports and the culture. So what kind of changes have you noticed in the public involvement of the sports?
As the sport is developing very quickly in China, China, because of the loss of connection between horse and society, we don't have a critical mass of modern horsey people here in China. You know, we are our pool of people who understand modern equestrian sports is quite small and quite narrow, and so as the industry develops, I think that will become a really big bottleneck. And I think, you know, over the years, hopefully we overcome these challenges, and then I think the sport will have a very, very strong home here.
As we know, the equestrian sport is a long term. So until what age do you plan to keep riding? Have you ever think about it, that?
I can't see me not riding, I think is the honest answer. Well, so let me put it this way. When I was 8th at the Rio Olympic Games, in 7th place was a hero in our sport, Sir Mark Todd from New Zealand, who was 60 years old, or maybe 62 years old in Rio, and he was 7th. In the Tokyo Olympic Games, bronze medalist was an Australian rider, Andrew Hoy, who was 62. In the pure dressage in London, 2012, there was a 72-year-old Japanese rider. I can keep going for quite some time, as long as I'm fit, fit and healthy and want to do it. But you know, as long as I'm fit and healthy, I'm pretty sure I'm always going to want to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. We sincerely wish you have a prosperous future.
Let's see. Thank you, Mr. Tao.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. 谢谢你。